and welcome once again to another episode of What Do You Believe? I'm Devin Croner. I am your host, and I am so glad to have you with us as we continue to talk to people about perspectives and insights and thoughts about things that maybe you've considered, maybe you haven't, maybe you've never looked at it this way. From their perspective, there's so much value in talking with people and getting their thoughts on things. Sorry, frog in my throat. And today I'm excited to talk to somebody who I know personally and is also a past client of mine, but he's an educator, and we're going to be talking about the education system a little bit today and kind of what works, what doesn't, and how maybe it can be refined. I'm excited to get into this discussion, and so I'm going to go ahead and invite him in here. And welcome, Morgan. How are you? Can you hear me all right? And everybody always has the little mute thing going on at first when they come in.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, indeed.
All right. Okay, cool.
Awesome. Well, welcome. First of all, thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule to meet with me and talk with me. To start off with, tell us a little bit about who you are, about yourself, your background, and what you do.
I'm Morgan McCall. I'm a school psychologist. I've been a school psych in Kentucky for about 8 years now. And a lot of it has to deal with special education, eligibility and determinations, and knowing the law related to those things, and different forms of assessment like IQ tests and achievement and behavior rating scales and things of that nature.
Wow. And how did you get into that? That's not the normal thing that people talk about when they say they're in education.
Sure. I got my bachelor's degree in psychology, and I knew that I didn't want to do the clinical type of setting. So I took a semester off and I worked at a summer camp down in Florida, and met the first school psychologist that I had come across. And then got really interested in it then and did some research when I got back home, and there was a school psych program right there where I lived. So I enrolled and got in that next semester.
Very nice. And what exactly do you do as a school psychologist? My point of reference for psychology is either Fraser Crane or Dr. James Dobson, focus on the family type of thing. So what is it really like?
So typically my day consists of doing different types of assessment, depending on what the concerns for that particular student are. We identify what types of assessments to use. And then we take that and other data like work samples from the classroom, other information like universal screenings that all the students take. It gives us an idea of how they're comparing to peers their age. And then we pull all that data together and we get together on what's called an ARC, or an acceptance and release committee, which involves a parent, at least one parent, a regular ed teacher, the special ed case manager, and then an administrator from the school, and then myself or any other, like a speech language pathologist or occupational therapist or some other type of related service provider. And then we all go over the information. Depending on the category of eligibility, so you've got things like everybody knows the specific learning disability or the SLD category, or like OHI, other health impairment, which like things like ADHD fall under. Those are the two by far most prevalent areas. But each category, and there are 13 of them, has its own requirements and criteria that you have to meet in order to determine whether or not the kid is eligible for special education services.
And so then if they are determined to be eligible, is there like an entry exit point? Is it one of those things where you try and get them in, get them help, get them out? Or is this something that continues on? How does that work?
So the idea is to basically get them in and at some point be able to release them, to be able to give them enough supplemental instruction to where they can basically do it on their own or with very minimal help. Working within the range of their peers is the way that we would say it. typically once kids get in, if there's a real true disability, then that kid, say it's in reading, then that kid is likely to struggle with reading throughout life. And so, we try to come up with different ways to like chunk the reading and take notes and highlight and find other types of strategies that they can use kind of going forward. But as the kids get older and matriculate through the higher grades, the content becomes more difficult. And so you're kind of always trying to keep up basically with the new demands of the school year.
Mm-hmm.
But then every now and then, so once you determine the eligibility, you develop the IEP, or the individualized education plan.
Mm-hmm.
And you have goals that are based on whatever areas of need there are. And those are, you redo those every year. So at least once a year, the ARC team gets together and goes over the progress of the student and talks about, strengths and weaknesses and, areas that have improved and maybe haven't. And then what we're planning to do to keep on helping that student show improvement in that area.
Right.
And then every 3 years, you have to have a completely new evaluation done. And then, but you can release at any time. Say that the student is consistently mastering their goals, but it's, the next evaluation's a year off.
Mm-hmm.
You can go ahead and, if everybody's in agreement, then you can go ahead and release the kid from the special ed services at that time.
Now, do you find that there is any kind of stigma for kids that have an IEP program that's set up for parents, for the students themselves, for other students? Or is this something that everybody just kind of understands is part of life for certain people?
That's actually a question that we get quite frequently from, especially parents that are kind of dealing with this for the first time. We obviously want to make every effort that we can to not make the kids feel like they're so different. And the way that the school day is structured now, these days anyway, kids are moving in and out of the classroom all the time anyway, to go to this group or this group. And so we don't ever say, okay, all the special ed kids, it's time to go now. They just go to their champion reading group or whatever it's called. Mm-hmm. And most of the time, especially when you get older, it's a little more obvious the kids that are having trouble. And the vast majority of other kids are, tolerant and willing to help and assist in whatever ways that they can to help their fellow students succeed.
So it sounds like that's come a long way, even from, I'm only in my 30s, but, from the early 90s, I remember I had to have speech therapy because I had trouble with my S sound. And it was a certain time they would come in the middle of normal class and pull you out and say, okay, it's time for your special lessons, in kind of in front of everybody. And here I am, second, third grade, like, oh, okay. And then I'm in the hallway doing these special sounds as other kids are going to the bathroom or going to their lockers or whatever it was. So it sounds like it's way different now.
Yes, I would say in the last 10, 15 years, there's really been a push for that inclusion. And especially in the last 5 to 10 years, we're realizing that if students don't have that solid, healthy kind of social emotional foundation, then they're much less likely to be able to learn and retain new information. And so that's part of our equation too. We have to make sure that the kids are in a good state emotionally before we can really expect them to perform. So that's part and parcel of that, making sure that everybody feels welcome and feels like they have a place.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So now as a psychologist, though, do you handle if there's a death or if a tragedy happens in the school or something like that? Is that part of your wheelhouse as well, or is that separate?
It can be. I'm trained to do that type of thing. Depending on the school district, they have between like your school counselors and your school psychologists, and some districts might have some other more specialized like behavior specialists and things like that. Mm-hmm. Again, according to the makeup of the district and how they do those logistics, we can do any number of things, including the crisis prevention that you're talking about, and then dealing if there's like a death or in the student population or the teachers, then all school districts already have a kind of like system program in place to
Hmm.
deal with those kinds of things, and to identify those kids that are struggling, and to make sure that they're able to talk to someone and, get whatever supports we can provide.
Right. And again, that's something that's come a long way since the days of Columbine, even, and has kind of continued to develop, unfortunately, more and more over the last few years, especially. What is that like in a school setting where, I mean, kids can come in every day not knowing for sure that they're safe? I mean, how do you come against that? How do you help normalize it? I mean, what is that like today?
Well, so now it's very common to see what they call a double entryway when you walk into the school. So, you've got the doors locked, and there's the little button that you press that's got the camera on it. And
Mhm.
so you've got to get through that door. And then there's like a little enclosed waiting area, basically. And then you have to, with this little sliding window. And so you have to say why you're there, and things like that, and show your identification. And then if everything checks out, then they let you in the school building. So
Mm.
there's that level of things, and also just one entrance where everybody kind of goes in and in, and obviously other doors where everybody can go out. But having just the one entryway, we do things like having the doors closed and locked at all times. We have various drills that we run. Some are more effective, or more, what's the word I'm looking for? A little bit more stress inducing than others. Like with active shooter drills and things like
Mhm.
that, people can take different approaches.
Right.
Um, but we do, what we can, and practice those things, and
Hmm.
make sure that the kids stay engaged in instruction and things like that, to where they have fewer chances to be distracted by things like that. And if there's a particular student that is feeling anxious about it, and is having a hard time getting over that, then, we would have them come in to talk to one of the counselors, or myself, or one of the administrators, just to see if we can identify um, what we could do to make them feel more safe.
Hmm. Yeah, because again, I think back to 25 years ago, there was a fire drill and a tornado drill. That was
Right.
about it. So, I mean, how are kids today coping with all of the other things that have to go into being in school, like these active shooter drills and things like that? Because again, when I went to school, the front doors were just wide open; anybody could walk in, and sometimes even the sides of the back doors would be wide open
Right.
too. So, do you find, especially in your vein in education, that there's more anxiety, that it's harder for kids to focus, and what would you attribute that to, if anything specific?
Oh, lots of things, lots of new challenges for kids these days. I would say that overall, compared to when I was in school, which was in the late '90s, early 2000s, um, there's a lot higher anxiety. Um, Things like social media
Hmm.
are making it very difficult for healthy interactions to take place, because it's easy to be mean behind a screen or a keyboard, that kind of thing.
Hmm.
And then just the viral nature of things. If Susie says something that might be a little embarrassing, if it gets on Snapchat, then that can get showed to thousands, if not millions, of people very quickly. um, there's also, with the internet, and that was around when we were in school, but not to the same degree that it is now. I mean, you can find anything you want to on the internet, and it's a blessing and a curse. It's great to be able to know what's going on in different places of the world, but it's stress inducing to see all the other things, the bad things that are happening in other places.
Right.
And we're much more hyper aware of those things, and our ability to cope with that kind of influx of that type of information has
Hmm.
not kept up with the actual rate of
Hmm.
modern technology. And so it's really tough. And the kids that come from homes where their parents already have good coping skills, those kids obviously fare much better than uh, homes that are more unstable,
Hmm.
homes where there's substance abuse, or emotional abuse, some kind of abuse,
Hmm.
or other forms of trauma. then those kids are already starting behind. And so a lot of things that we're seeing, increase. It's because of the home environment. And then we also have to consider like screen time. We're finding out that if you have too much screen time at the younger ages, as the brain is still quickly developing, then it makes it more difficult to focus for longer periods of time, because your brain, as you're working through those things, and everything is so quick these days on a screen, that's how your brain starts to wire itself to process information in such short bursts, because there's just frequent stimulation, right? And it's something new every time. Like, some people think, well, my kid can sit there and play video games for 6 hours, so he can focus on that. Well, the video game is giving him fresh new stimulation every few seconds.
Right. And
so things like that, and really making sure that people are being cognizant of the neural groundwork that they are laying, and just kind of taking it for granted, like the screen time and things like that.
So if they're very active, you're saying, on the screens a lot when they're younger, even if they're doing an educational thing, like I have a couple of younger kids, and we use ABC Mouse, so it's learning paths and all that sort of stuff. But even that, what you're saying, because it's always new and always different, it's wiring their brains to process information in such a way that later on, if they have to critically think about things, if they have to slow down and figure stuff out, that's going to affect their ability to do that. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. That's exactly it. And so it's important. Teachers always stress the importance of reading. And that's the number one thing that we have, that, is one sustained kind of activity that you then have to, in order to comprehend something, you have to not only be able to read the words, but you have to know what those mean. And then you have to make those kind of abstract connections in your mind, and do things like inferences. Say it's not explicitly stated in the text, but you just know it's there through the context, or through the other things that are happening. And so reading is such a very complex thing, and it is one of those, it's dull, compared to the screens and things like that. But that's the number one way that we work on training those longer, sustaining thought for those longer periods of time, and being able to think critically, and things like that.
Wow. So continuing in the vein of technology and its influence, you were talking about social media and those sorts of things. I saw something a couple of weeks ago, I don't remember when it was exactly, but about a kid, I think it was 8 or 9, so a younger child, that had attempted suicide because of cyberbullying. And my first thought was, what was he doing on social media? My second thought is, who's cyberbullying an 8-year-old? But that's kind of the world we're in now. And what you're saying is so true, that it's so easy when you're behind a screen and there's a username involved to say things that, it's not that you don't mean them, but it's that it wouldn't be kosher to say it face to face. And now it's so easy. So how are you dealing with that in a school environment?
It basically on a case-by-case basis. It has to come to our attention. Most of the time, these things happen outside of school. So there's a little bit of debate on how responsible the schools are to stop cyberbullying that's not happening on campuses. But yeah, case by case, usually it's the victim brings it to their attention, or one of their parents does. And then there's usually some kind of investigation into what it was. And then you talk to the perpetrator, and basically, usually the first time it'll be a warning, unless it's something really, really serious. There's a warning. Things like a suicide, if you're encouraging a child to harm themselves in some way, that's punishable. I mean, that's a felony.
Right.
So we would get the police involved in that type of case. So yeah, it certainly happens. I wish that there was more of an environment where kids felt more comfortable telling adults that these things are happening, but they don't want to, they don't want to be a snitch, and they don't want to, be a tattletale and things like that. kind of those traditional challenges with getting people to advocate for themselves.
I was just going to say it's the same problems. It's just a different way. I mean, I remember the same thing. We, being the manager of the basketball team, some of the players that weren't as cool or didn't play as much, getting mistreated, if you will, in certain ways, or made to do things that others didn't have to do, and they didn't want to tell anybody. They didn't want anybody to. It's the same stuff, but now we're dealing with it, and it's faster and it's more direct. And when there's the screen involved, it's kind of constant, right? There's no separation.
Yeah, absolutely. It can be constant, and more, way more people can weigh in on the matter.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas like back in the day, it was just pretty much between the two people.
Mm-hmm.
But now other people can, not only spectate, but give their color commentary, which, never helps.
So talk about the importance of the home environment then with this, and how that plays into a child's education. You kind of touched on it, but I think it's not going to be any surprise that kids that have more stable home environments are going to be more emotionally healthy. They're going to learn better. They're going to do better in school. But if you don't, and for whatever reason, maybe there's issues, financial pressures, whatever, hunger issues are a one that we hear about a lot. How does that play in, and what can the schools do? I know there's a lot of pressure on schools to fix these problems, but what is realistic?
It's really multifaceted. So yeah, you've got your different types of. Let's just start with like someone that the parents work really hard. They're working 60, 70 hours a week, just doing the best they can, try to live kind of paycheck to paycheck, trying to put food on the table and just provide a consistent shelter there. So that family is probably at a fairly high level of stress on a regular basis, where one unexpected big expense could really throw a wrench in things. And so just having that level of tension present in the home creates stress in itself. And so when we're stressed, we release these neurochemicals, and over long periods of time and repeated exposure to these stressors, you don't become necessarily desensitized to them. It just becomes more of a part of who you are. So like, you internalize those things in the form of anxiety or in the form of depression. And with kids, especially, they're not even developmentally capable of really understanding what's going on. They just know that they feel bad about it, and that they want that to change, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And so homes that have less stressors are able to focus more on the other things, especially in terms of like food security. Families that are food insecure, I could imagine that is basically all they think about.
Mm-hmm.
And so, with kids like that, we can't expect them to come in and, have the same baseline as, a kid that's coming from a perfectly nice and healthy and like middle class family, for example. Mm-hmm. And then you've got your situations where, parent communication styles, some parents are pretty awful communicators and will get in shouting matches and call each other nasty names, things like that. And kids are seeing all that, and they're going to model, or the kids are going to behave what they've been modeled. Mm-hmm. It's so important for adults to know before they go into even thinking about having children that everything they do is going to be soaked in like a sponge. Mm. And so it's a lot of parents that I come in contact with, they say, well, Timmy just won't do what I say, or he can't keep track of, long lists of instructions. And so we just get in shouting matches. Mm. And they just keep doing it over and over and over again, and wonder why, there continues to be a problem, as opposed to trying to come up with, let's make a list of the instructions. Let's give them only one or two at a time. Mm. Maybe they're, losing track of what it is that they're supposed to be doing after they've started. We can't yell at them and become angry at them because they're just, they're just kids, and they're, by and large, they're doing the best that they can to please us.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, just making sure that we understand that they're not little adults,
Mhm.
that they're little people, and they're learning how to people, and that we are the ones, adults, not just people that work in schools, but
Mhm.
we are the ones responsible for making sure that they learn how to be a person.
And even the preteen and teenager age, right? I mean, they're still learning how to process things, how to, you know, build these social relationships and respond the right way. Because we a lot of times we treat teenagers, high school kids, like they are adults, like they're fully capable. You know, we don't let them vote, we don't let them make certain decisions, but we talk to them like they should be able to, and that
Right.
can be very confusing for them too, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And especially with those kids, the teenage years are really tough because you're finding out who you are and what makes you click as a person, and throwing that out there in front of other people and seeing how other people react, and, the different consequences of your actions. And,
Mhm.
not, nobody gets it all right. And so we need to give some latitude there for personal growth, and to not make them feel like they have to be perfect. It's just completely unreasonable.
Mhm. Now, within the structure of the educational system, um, how is it set up to help kids succeed now? And is it effective in your mind, in your opinion, as a professional, in today's environment with today's challenges? And how do we adjust it then? That's a lot to throw out there, but that's kind of where I want to shift to, because I know you had some thoughts about this, and that's one of the things that led us to this conversation. So, kind of what works, what doesn't, how do we do better?
What works? They're just the good old traditional instruction, with a teacher who knows what they're talking about and can be engaging, and making the students interested in something
Mhm.
that they may not be interested in otherwise. We have not, in America, we have not done a very good job of keeping up with, not only using modern technology
Mhm.
to aid, but in just our teaching methods. And so science through science, we know that expecting kids to sit there for 50 minutes at a time and just like be quiet and get it all in there and be the perfect student is not reality.
Mhm.
It's not like that anywhere at all.
Right.
Um, and so we've got, I think that we could do a better job in helping the kids and the students also drive the way that they want to be taught, the way that they, want to demonstrate their mastery of that content.
Hmm. So, like a
Um,
Montessori style
like,
almost.
yeah, very similar to a Montessori style type thing. We've
Mhm.
put such an emphasis on these standardized tests,
Mhm.
and I want to put a pin in that. Um, that it's made it difficult for teachers to stray outside of that, because
Mhm.
that's what their performance is based on, is the kids' performance on these various standardized assessments. And
Right.
those cover, whatever the content area is, they cover a wide variety of subject matter.
Mhm. But
And
they have
there's
to speak
no,
to the test, right? So that you can
yeah,
pass the test.
right. And so the first programs or classes to be eliminated or kind of like pushed off to the side, or your arts and fine arts, more creative based classes. And so
Mhm.
kids are not developing the ability to be creative and to problem solve,
Mhm.
because they're just having to regurgitate this information.
Right.
And so they're not developing that capability to really, put their personal spin on something.
Mhm.
And I think that's really hitting us hard. Um, just when they become adults, feeling like they need to fit into some kind of mold. They
Mhm.
don't really know what makes them tick, and what, ways that they can express themselves in healthy ways,
Mhm.
whether it be through like singing or drawing or anything like that.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
and so I think we have a lot of mental health issues that arise out of that type of thing too, because
Mhm.
there's a real disconnect between, the the mind and the soul, I guess, if you will.
That's so good. And I mean the educational side of it, the math, the reading, all of that, that's important. The knowledge is important, but the art and culture side of it is really kind of where you enjoy life usually.
Yes,
And
that's
so
it.
when you leave all that out, you end up with people that are anxious and high strung basically.
Yeah, and they're gonna cope somehow. And most people aren't mental health professionals, and so they don't find a healthy way to do that. They usually will find a substance or gambling or some other kind of self-destructive way to cope with all that anxiety.
Well, one of the things, of course, you know that I sell houses because I had the privilege of working with you. But one of the things that I thought was so amazing, this had never even been a consideration of mine before. But I had a client, a young man, 24 years old, buying his first house, and he made, I don't know what he did. He worked in a factory, made excellent money. I mean, 70,000 plus dollars a year. He had an anxiety attack before the closing because he could not write his name. He had never been taught how to sign his name, and so he's got to sign all this paperwork.
Yeah,
His mom, we had to take him over with his mom into another conference room, and he spent 15 minutes just basically learning a basic signature. But I mean, literally a panic attack because he'd never been taught that. And that's something that to me was so fun. Like, I remember learning how to write way back in kindergarten, write my letters. Uh,
yeah,
but we've changed it to where we're focusing, as you said, with the test, we're focusing on getting people to a place of knowing certain facts. But are those facts really the things that are needed for life? Not that the education isn't important, but are we really setting them up to succeed when they walk out the door and now they have to do it themselves?
right. Yeah, it's a real challenge, and there's there are pros and cons to the whole standardized assessments. You want to have some kind of objective way to quantify what the teacher effectiveness and what students are learning. In Kentucky versus Ohio,
Mhm.
but at the same time, it's, as we have seen, it's eliminated all these other very important aspects that is the people side of things, is the human side of things, not only in what we're expecting kids to learn, but in what teachers can teach. And
Right.
you want those teachers to be able to share what they're passionate about, not just have to stick to the script, basically.
And in that, does it? I would think, again, I'm not an educator in this regard, but I would think it would be very difficult to be handed. I mean, as a pastor, I enjoy the fact that I get to craft a sermon and talk about things that I know people are going through, I know they're struggling with, but also that have some level of interest to me, or that I think this is important. If I was just handed a sermon that was pre-written and said, "Here, preach this," uh, I mean, that kind of eliminates the whole reason that I wanted to do this. Uh,
Right.
is that kind of the same in terms of teaching? Is that driving people away from the profession even, do you think?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. And we put so many demands on our teachers. I mean, not only do we pay them poorly, but every year they've got one more piece of paperwork to fill out.
Mm-hmm.
They've got to teach their content material, and then they've also got to fill out these behavior rating scales on 5 of their students, after every single class period, so that we can have the data that we need to make the decisions that we have to make.
Mm-hmm.
And we make them pay for things out of pocket because the school budgets are not enough such that they can get basically just the necessities.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's fewer and fewer incentives to stay in the game, and the people that are in it now are really they are in it for the kids and for feeling passionate about trying to create a better future for the country and the world. And there's such a high burnout rate. I think the average length of time for teachers these days is like 5 years.
Oh, wow.
And they either get out completely or they move on to some other facet of education. And that's, that obviously in and of itself creates a huge problem. We would much rather have a large army of very experienced and good teachers in there to help mentor the newer ones and to also help drive the culture of the school and things like that.
Well, I mean, again, I think back to when I was in school, especially younger, the most impactful teachers I had were like little grandmas.
Yeah.
But they were just wise sages who knew everything from how to soothe you if you got hurt on the playground to how to help you read a word when you were struggling with it. And not that a new teacher and an experienced teacher can't still do that, but there is something that comes with experience. Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And you miss that in the transfer from generation to generation when you don't have that level of mentorship.
Yeah. 100%.
Also, the thing that I think we see from the news, the negative aspect of it is when you have teachers that are really close, especially in high school, they're really close in age to the students, you can get into other problems as well. And so then it just makes everybody look bad and the whole system look maybe even more deficient than it is. Or am I overreacting to that?
Yeah. I mean, we certainly see those cases. I've been in work situations where I was very close to those, those types of bad situations.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure there are some people out there that really, they'll kind of overgeneralize and use those very few bad apples to kind of poo-poo the whole system. But by and large, maybe this is just wishful thinking, but I think most people think that most teachers are, trying to do a good job and, are there for the right reasons.
Yeah.
And certainly, the school is there when something does happen, that they will take swift and meaningful action.
Mm-hmm. How are we teaching compared to other parts of the world that are doing it successfully? If you know and can speak to that, and like, what are some of the things that we are doing differently that we could make improvements in our system as a whole?
Sure. Two really simple things that some of the more successful countries are doing are having smaller class sizes, so that there's more opportunities for one-on-one instruction when a kid is struggling.
Mm-hmm.
Also, paying teachers more. They make it competitive with some of the other higher-paying occupations like doctors and lawyers and things, and so they get a higher quality applicant to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
And and those people, they support them. They provide them with adequate resources, and not only in terms of like just funding and having the money for what they need, but having the people power.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's really, really helpful to have 2 or 3 extra people in the classroom, even if they're not certified and like traditionally trained teachers,
Right.
just to help with basic things, to help read a word or to help them get their attention back on the task or things like that. And then because they make it easy to be a teacher over there, then people stay in for longer. And so you see that, longitudinally, you see those long-term effects of, having great people stick with it for such a long time. And it creates a healthier culture. When the teachers are happier, the students are happier. It's just a better system when no one's having to worry about the silly, minute little things that really should not be an issue in a country like America.
I completely agree. Now, here's the follow-up question to that, because to me, that's a funding issue, which really is a priority issue. Kind of like in my own personal budget. I can say I don't have enough money to do something, but the reality is, if I spent $100 on new movies at the store and video games, it's not a matter of not having the money, it's a matter of not having the priority. And that kind of sounds like the problem that you're describing here in America, is that everybody talks about the importance of education. Everybody talks about the importance of teachers. I've never heard a single person, to my knowledge, that has ever said teachers are terrible people and they deserve less. Never heard that. But we're not doing it as a society. So what's the gap in your mind between what we say and what we do? How do we begin to bridge that?
That's a really great question. I think if we were to pick one thing that would kind of springboard the rest of it, it's paying paying teachers better, and providing more incentives to get smarter and more passionate people to choose education. And I think that everything will improve past that.
Mhm.
We're seeing even now, how like you say, everybody's always said we it's important, how education is so very important in all these things, but then we have people nowadays that reject expert opinion and don't want to wear a mask, and things like that. And so we're seeing that play out in
Mhm.
our world today, and how detrimental that can be.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, it sounds like the solution is really just do what we say we're going to do as far as the political side of it, right? So, are there things that people, parents, or just people that are out there that might be watching, that they can take? What's a concrete step that somebody could take, maybe, to say, hey, I want to make sure that these things, these initiatives to pay teachers better, to put more funding into the schools, to bring back the arts and the cultures and the humanities and the economics and all that stuff. I mean, what can we legitimately do to help the school, our local teachers? Um, Thoughts?
Pay taxes. Pay
Well,
taxes. Don't vote for people who are recommending. It's usually, most school districts get the bulk of their money, from property taxes.
mhm,
And so you'll have somebody coming up that says that they're going to cut taxes, and that's how they want to get elected. But
mhm,
it kind of boggles my mind how people want this great high quality education in America, but then they don't want to contribute to that through taxes. And so people have to realize that if you want something that's widely considered to be a public good, we have to be willing to contribute our fair share to that.
mhm,
And we can't assume that taking money away is going to improve the system. No,
right,
we just know that it's not true. And that's not to say that we should just throw money at everything. We need to have informed and data-based decisions.
mhm,
But yeah, again, we can't take funding away from things and expect them to improve. That's
mhm.
not how it works.
Yeah, I mean, I think we see that with roads as well.
Yeah, yeah, 100%.
We want good roads, but if we're not going to pay for them, we can't fix them.
Yeah.
So that sounds like you could be, somebody could point at what you're saying and say, well, you're describing more of a socialist kind of system. Is that, or do you think it just needs to be refined the way it is? Or do you think we need to move towards more of that, like, we're going to provide all of this and everybody needs to pay for it? How do we do it?
Well, I mean, that's essentially how we're doing it already. I mean, the public education, police departments, fire departments, and things like that are considered public good that we pay through taxes. Those are socialist programs already.
Mhm,
And that's another thing that people need to realize, is that uh, we already have so many, socialist programs,
mhm.
um, that we appreciate, and that have improved the quality of life in America,
Oh,
and things that we would not want to see go away, like Social Security. And that's totally a socialist program. Health insurance is a socialist program, except that it's for profit, and the people at the top can take as much money as they want to. But it's how it works. Everybody contributes,
mhm,
a fair amount based on your health condition and different things like that.
mhm.
And then it sometimes is, in theory, it helps other people when they are in trouble and would not otherwise have the money to cover that kind of
Sure.
thing.
Mhm,
And so I think people need to realize that that's just because something is quote unquote socialist doesn't make it bad all of a sudden. It can be a public good, and we need to, when there's consensus on that kind of thing, we've got to step up to the plate and
mhm,
and do what it takes to have that manifest.
mhm. Absolutely. I completely agree. And you're exactly right in terms of, there are all these things, these systems that we have in place that nobody wants to lose that. I mean, you don't, even with the culture right now, the talk about the police, nobody actually wants there to not be somebody to respond if there's a situation. We just
Right.
want it to be different, right?
Right.
So we have this system and we have this education system, but again, it's very different. Like I grew up in a small town, rural, white. I think there was one black person in my entire high school. There may have been more, but if they were hiding because I never saw them. But the education that I got is very, very different, even than the education that a lot of kids in. I live in Covington, that go to Covington Independent Schools. I'm not knocking the school, but I'm just saying I know from talking to parents and talking to people in the community that what they're getting is not what I got.
Yeah.
So there's this uneven distribution. I mean, you're talking about smaller class sizes and paying teachers better, but like, how do we fix that? How do you have smaller class sizes in a big city? How do you I don't know. I mean, I have no answer, but it's just it seems like this should not be as difficult as it is.
Right. Well, just as the years and decades have passed, we've only continued to take away from education systems, and so they're forced to consolidate more kids in a classroom and hire fewer teachers, and
Mhm.
and that's that's the effect that that kind of thing has. And so, like in a bigger city, they need to purchase more real estate essentially, and be able to hire more teachers.
Yeah,
Yeah. Right.
there's more real estate.
Um, yeah. And we also need to recognize that, like, depending on the kind of socioeconomic majority at a given school, that really, really impacts the students and the teachers in that school. And so we have places where it is really tough to be a student and a teacher because of things that are going on in the home environment and in the neighborhoods and things.
Mhm.
Going back to that social emotional piece, those people are not coming into the school actually ready to learn and engage in instruction and in the education because they're thinking about something else.
Mhm.
Um, and when George W. Bush passed the No Child Left Behind, that program really took a step in the wrong direction because it cut funding from underperforming schools, but those are the schools that needed more resources.
Mhm.
And so it just got worse.
Mhm.
You can't punish people by taking resources away. It's not going to help. Again, taking money away does not help the problem ever.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that'd be like telling a hungry person, we're going to take some of your food and you need to figure it out from there. That it doesn't make sense on the surface. Uh, exactly right. But again, that's not how you think it's going to work at the time or how you hope it's going to work at the time. The idea, that was described was that this is going to be an incentive. If we do this and we're going to incentivize it, everybody will work harder. But it's not feasible to just work harder in a situation where you need copy paper, you need pencils, you need desks, you need textbooks, uh, all that sort of
Yeah.
stuff, right? Wow. Now, how does like the distance learning and the virtual learning play into this? When you're talking about smaller classrooms, you're talking about more individualized attention, and especially in the COVID world that we live in now, do you think that there are some solutions there that we can begin to kind of model and shift to that could help some of these things?
Yeah, I do think that we'll see. I don't think that we'll go back to the old way of doing things. I think that, yeah, all of this is going to change society in general, American society and global society in general,
Mhm.
in numerous ways. And I hope that includes opportunities for remote instruction at home, especially for kids that do struggle in the classroom with being around so many kids.
Mhm.
Um, with the, like, behavior, just being distracted. Um, Other kids with, like, that are immunocompromised, and there are certain situations now where children can qualify for what they call home hospital, and where there's a teacher usually goes out and does like about 6 hours a week in instruction. But those criteria are very stringent, and it's a very high threshold to do that kind of thing. And I think that getting more comfortable with these online platforms will make it easier for people to branch out. And then we also see huge issues with especially rural districts that struggle with money. Like Campbell County just last school year absorbed Silver Grove because of funding. And so when those kids came in, there was a market difference in what we could expect them to do compared to their grade level peers that had been in Campbell County the whole time. So just things like that, even in the same kind of general area, you can see huge differences there. I think that increasing internet access in those areas and making it affordable can help get access to higher quality education, which I think would be a good thing.
Well, and that was what I was going to ask you to speak to next. Of course, with the whole COVID situation, that's one of the things that's been talked about a lot. When you listen to all the talking heads of, virtual learning. I see two hurdles that have to be overcome. Number one, we're asking teachers to do a whole different thing, because how you teach online is going to be different than how you teach in a class.
Yeah.
So another thing, we're not paying you anymore, but we want you to do more now.
Yeah, learn a whole new skill set.
and do it right now.
Yeah.
Number two, not everybody has the same access. Like, I'm sitting here talking to you on a Mac with, the best Wi-Fi that my money can buy me. Not everybody has that. And so you can say, well, we're going to provide the virtual learning, we're going to provide the education, but if the kids can't get to it, if they're in a home that still doesn't have internet, or if they don't have the technology, or even older technology that doesn't work with newer systems, that they're still going to be left behind.
Right. Yeah, we need to realize as a society that the internet is an absolute necessity these days, an absolute necessity, even if you don't have kids, even if you just want to be competitive in the job market, you've got to have internet access. And so that, we need to make sure that everywhere has access, affordable access, and some kind of quality access. Like back home in Western Kentucky, I know some of the places still out in the county, only have dial-up. And can you imagine trying to load a web page, a modern web page with a dial-up connection? It would take a year.
I remember downloading songs on Napster on dial-up. And my mom picks up the phone to make a phone call, and I'm at 97%. I'm like, no, you just wasted the whole day.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So trying to log into a video class. Now, I mean, some people will say, well, but they have cell phones. They have, everybody's got an iPhone. Everybody's got a smartphone. But some of these systems are not really conducive to something that is this size, right?
Absolutely not. And then, and most people don't, the people that don't have the internet access also don't have the money usually to have, where you have like an unlimited plan, basically. They get the prepaid services, and that stuff, the data's expensive. It's really expensive. Absolutely. And so it's also cost prohibitive to just have to rely on a phone data service.
So like we make education available in this country. I mean, we pay for it, again, through property taxes, as you described, but like every kid, for lack of a better term, has the right to be able to go to school and to learn. Do you think that is something we need to look at in terms of the internet and the data side of it in this country, and say, if this is where we are in our world, this has to be available? Whether we're all paying for it, or we restructure how this business is modeled, or, I mean, is that something that we need to be looking at?
Yeah, and a lot of school districts are already doing that. Like in Campbell County this school year, they approved over the summer, like, I don't know how many laptops, but they spent like $500,000 on new Google Chromebooks so that every student starting in 3rd grade could have a one-to-one device that they can send home. And I know that they're also working with internet service providers in the area to see what they can do there for families that don't have it. And a lot of companies are providing free kind of basic internet speed access for little to no cost for certain families. So I think that there's a lot coming around in school districts. They do realize that technology is, even before all the COVID stuff, that technology really is something that we need to be utilizing and teaching kids how to use effectively and responsibly.
But again, that's another expense. So you spend $500 million on technology. That's a lot of money that's not going to pay teachers to do training, to put, counselors in schools to help, those that have learning issues. I mean, I'm not saying that's not good, but you already have a really small pool. So again, this comes back to America. We've got to really have almost a moment of reckoning based on what you're saying of, is this truly a priority? We say our kids are our future, but is this truly a priority to where we are going to fix this and put the funding into the schools and the teachers and the resources that are needed? I mean, is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. And we're seeing the effects of that now. How people are struggling to do the most simple of things simply because they lack the either the willingness or the capacity to research or consider expert opinion, even if it's kind of inconvenient for them. If we can't get over the hurdle of inconvenience, then we're in serious trouble. How many more people need to die before we finally learn our lesson? And I fear for our democracy as a whole, and how misinformation and lack of education is coming into play in all of that too. It's kind of a scary time right now.
Again, you talk about how accessible everything is on the internet, but the famous Abraham Lincoln quote, not to believe everything that you read online. This is a huge problem. And again, if we're not taught to critically think and to do research, I mean, that's a big deal. Being able to see other viewpoints. Like, that's part of the reason I started doing this, is I wanted to talk to people that were interesting, but I also wanted to talk to people that don't think like I do.
Right.
And we're not taught to do that. But that's one of the things that schools, that good educators can help you do, is critically think and look at other points of view.
Right, but now that's been politicized into being, it's those liberals trying to brainwash everybody. And so it makes it really difficult.
Wow. So here we are now in a moment where, like, right now the conversation is getting kids back to school. Now, this probably won't be available for people to watch for a couple of more months because I'm in the process of developing all this. But at the moment, we don't know what that's going to look like. There are a lot of teachers. I mean, I've actually talked to one teacher that I'm thinking about retiring because I don't know. I don't feel like I have enough input, and I don't feel like I have enough insight to know whether or not this is even a good idea to go back. That whole conversation is completely different even than the funding and the resources now.
Yeah.
And that's going to require more money to make sure that places are clean enough and all of that. So where are we right now in terms of those sorts of issues?
Oh, it's horrifying right now. We've got these kind of basic guidelines with social distancing and wearing a mask and washing your hands frequently and things like that. But in the school setting, I mean, how many kids are we going to have that won't keep their mask on, or that,
I can remember there ever being soap in the boys' bathrooms
right.
Except maybe the first day of school.
Yeah. Yeah, and the hallways are not big enough to have like two groups of, in most places they're not big enough to have like two groups of kids going in opposing directions.
Right.
down the hall. So it's, scheduling is going to be difficult. Kids that already struggle with the routine school day are really, really going to struggle now.
Mm.
It's going to be a nightmare. And depending
So,
on, go
go
ahead.
ahead. Yeah.
Just depending on how schools choose to come back, like in Campbell County, we're offering the option to do online full time,
Mm-hmm.
and then up to 2 days coming into the school per week. And so you'd have a like group A basically on Monday, Tuesday, and then group B on Thursday, Friday, and then Wednesday is just I guess only remote.
Hmm.
And even though we're going to see fewer numbers of kids in school, it'll be easier to social distance and to kind of control behavior.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, what's going to happen when the kid that was here last Monday, and it's like a week ago last Monday, it has tested positive for COVID now?
Mm-hmm.
How are we going to do that? Are we going to send everybody else home? Are we going to send the teachers home? How are we going to get a substitute to come in? It's going to create a huge mess. Schools are already short on space.
Mm-hmm.
And so where are we going to house the kids that refuse to wear a mask because they're just a little stinker, or because their family doesn't believe in wearing masks?
Or because they're 6 or 7 and don't understand, and
Right.
I mean, all of those things. And then also, there's the sporting events. There's
Yeah.
Football season and basketball and prom and homecoming and all of those sorts of things as well. Does all that go away?
Yeah, I think it has to, and we're figuring that out now. I know someone personally, a teacher that I used to work with, her son is in high school and is a football player, and they've had their camps or whatever according to the guidelines, the health guidelines, and he contracted COVID, and now his entire family and the football team, anybody that was even remotely near him, is now quarantined for the next 2 weeks. I know that I work with marching band, and I know that like almost everybody I know, all my buddies that are band directors across the state, have suspended their marching band programs, and they're just going to do something completely different this year. And I think that the State Music Educators Association has also already said that they're not planning to sponsor any kind of competitions or anything this school year. And so I think, I feel bad for the seniors and everybody, but we just can't risk people's lives so that we can play football.
Well, but again, it changes the whole landscape of everything. I mean, if you're talking about no band and the musical education, that's going to affect a lot, the ripple effects of churches that use teenage musicians, college programs. I mean, people get scholarships, right, to go into band. Football, same thing. The camaraderie, the teamwork, you lose that whole thing, and then you're not in school every day. You're only, what you're talking about, going twice a week. The isolation, not being around your friends, not building the camaraderie, all those things. We're solving a problem, which I think is necessary, but we're creating a whole bunch of other problems, and we don't even know what they are yet.
Right.
And that's kind of scary in and of itself.
Yeah, most definitely. And even while kids are at school during all this, it's not going to be the same. I know that, one of the big arguments out there for having kids come back into the school buildings is the whole socialization aspect. They're not going to be able to do that.
Right.
They'll be able to see each other across the room, but they're not going to be able to eat lunch together at the same table or play together outside or anything like that. It's not going to go back to the way it was anytime soon.
So what about people who say, well, we all just need to do an at-home education, whether it's virtual learning or homeschooling or things like that? I mean, do you see that as being more of a viable alternative? And maybe we, over time, start to go away from traditional school where we're getting together in a building and sitting in classrooms?
Yeah, I mean, I think at least for the kind of foreseeable future, until we've got a widely produced and distributed vaccine, with also an understanding of, how likely this is to pop back up.
Mhm.
It's gonna take us a long time to not only develop that vaccine, but to make enough to get it around to all the places,
Right.
and then to get enough people vaccinated where we can rely on that herd immunity.
Yeah.
And then we were not going to know how effective those vaccines are until after we start using them. Are we going to need a booster shot every year or every 2 years, or is it only going to be good for 3 months? We don't know yet.
Right.
And so I think we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves and trying to think that we can put some kind of timeline on this when we're going to be back to some kind of normal instruction. And so I think that we are being forced to, to modify the way that we do the instruction remotely, and through the online platforms. And I think that when kind of on the other side of the COVID thing, I think that we're going to find that some people are more comfortable and are, more effective learners and more effective teachers through that medium. And I think that hopefully will be able to be incorporated, and taken into consideration back, even when we know things are safe to go back into the traditional classroom.
So good things can definitely come out of this, but it's going to take time to figure out exactly what those are.
Right. Totally.
Well, I know I don't want to keep you for too long, but I want to end just kind of with this thought. The idea of the program is, what do you believe? We've talked about a lot of different things that you believe, but if you could kind of summarize it in a couple of sentences in terms of education in America, where we are, what is it you believe as a educator, as a spectator? Take it away.
I believe we need to provide much more robust and consistent support to our schools and teachers and students. We need to make better efforts so that every student feels like they have a place in the school, even if they struggle with reading or math, kind of these traditional subjects. We need to make sure that they feel like school is somewhere that they can grow as a person, and that it is going to prepare them to have a successful future in life, and it's going to allow them to have a good quality of life.
Amen. That's here, here. I love it. And there are so many things that we didn't even touch on, like helping people who are dealing with coming out, or gender identity, or the whole issue with Black Lives Matter. I mean, so many other things, and how that affects our kids that we could get into. But you've shared so much, and I appreciate it so much. Thank you for your time and taking the time to talk with me today. And it's great to see you.
Yeah. Thanks, Devin. It was a lot of fun. Thank you so much for the insightful questions and really listening and engaging. And I think this is such a cool thing that you're doing.
Well, thank you. And hopefully we'll get together again and talk about another topic soon. So,
Yeah.
and everybody watching, thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed this, learned something, sparked some interest, some thoughts for you. And I hope you come back and join us again. All right, everybody, have a great one. Morgan, thanks again. Bye.
Bye-bye.